Hi, welcome to Haven. This is a podcast that's a safe space for curiosity and conversation. I'm your host, Haven, and today I'm curious about the birds and the bees. The birds and the bees. So if you clicked on this episode, I'm hoping you're in a private spot away from your kids, because the whole topic of this episode is really how to have this conversation with your kids about sex. Many of us maybe grew up with this version of the talk where we didn't know much about sex. Then someone sat us down and explained like sexual intercourse, and it went from nothing to that version. There wasn't a lot of layering in between. There wasn't a lot of like lead in. It was all of a sudden you didn't know about sex and now you do. And there's actually a different way to be able to handle that conversation. I'm a part of a book club with some friends. We often take books, but one time we did an online course, and it is the Birds and the Bees course. At the end of the episode, they actually give me a little discount code for you guys so you can get 20% off, mainly because I loved this resource. They advocate for something called a drip, drip, drip method, where it's age-appropriate conversations leading into really the kid's lifetime talking about sex. It's not, something taboo. It's not something to be discussed, but it starts really in the beginning with talking about seeds and eggs with toddlers and how that is kind of the initial formation of life. And then it progresses from there. But I've started these kind of things with our toddlers, and it helps. Like, they're not taking this into some big, complex, abstract area. It really is simple, and it's really in their terms and what's age appropriate for them. So I shot my shot with the creators of this course. We follow each other on social media. I think one of my clips talking about the drip, drip, drip method ended up going viral and picking up speed. And so we've just been DM friends, and I said, hey, would you guys ever come on the podcast? I take it really seriously, whoever I put in front of this camera or on this couch, because so far, it's really only been friends or people that I really vouch for who they are in general, and these are conversations we're already having. It's my first time meeting them, but it doesn't feel like it's the first conversation I've had with them because I've gleaned so much from them. I appreciate the content they're putting out, and so I do advocate for them. I think it's an amazing, amazing resource, and I wanted to talk on this kind of tricky topic with the founders of the Birds and the Bees. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Megan and Mary Flo. Hi, Megan. Hi, Mary Flo.
Well, hello there.
Hi, we're so excited to be here.
I know, it's nice to officially meet you. I feel like I've obviously seen the course, I've seen you online, but we've never chatted before.
I know, it's fun to feel like you're real friends.
Exactly. Thank you for having us, Haven. We're excited to be here.
Yeah, I mean, it's even, you say real friends, but I'm like, how often am I talking about sex with my real friends? It doesn't come up as often as you think, but we're going to go there today.
Yeah, we're going there.
Might as well start there.
Might as well. Okay. I thought I'd like to start by sharing my side of how my siblings and I found out about sex. Just kind of setting the stage with my experience with it. So we were a pretty conservative home, and so I was homeschooled. So I didn't have the potential to hear it, at school that most did. And I was born in the early 90s, so there wasn't the internet. There wasn't a lot of attack on it. So my parents did get to be the first set of people to talk to us. So what they had set up with, and God bless them, on paper this sounds awesome. They were like, we're going to wait, and when you're 10 years old, we're going to take you on a special trip together. We're going to do something fun, and then we're going to have a big, conversation. And so that's all we knew about what was going to happen. So my brother went at 10 years old. I think they went to Legoland or something, and it was this whole thing, and he came back, and we were like, how was it? He goes, well, it was great until the discussion. And I was like, oh, okay, I'll just wait for my turn. So with my turn, I'm turning 10. He kept it on his side. He didn't bring anything else up. And before I go, he was like, hey, you just might want to bring a barf bag. And I was like, what is he talking about? This is going to be a fun trip. So we went, and then I'll never forget it. We were sitting in this booth, me on one side, my parents on the other side. And I think they even had some type of book or something. And they were explaining what sex was, how it worked. And I remember feeling internally just a little scandalized of whoa, I felt like I had no idea that's what was happening. And after they finished, they're like, well, do you have like any questions for us? And I just was like, yeah, so Pastor Jack does that? In my head, I was literally like, who's the holiest person I know? Because this does not seem like that pure. And I just remember being like, yeah, I can't believe our pastor does this. And so then like I'm trying to figure it out, you know, coming home, and like then we had some follow-up questions. But then my little sister, she is sweet and quiet. She's kind of the peacemaker of the family. And so it's time for her to go on the trip. And, you know, she's 1 year. So we're all 1 year apart. So we're going like 1 year after another.
Amazing. Impressive.
So she goes on this trip, and she had been prepped by us. She's going on this amazing trip. And they go and they're about to start having the conversation. And she goes, you know, guys, like to my parents, I don't think my heart's ready for whatever you're about to share. I'd like to not have this conversation. And she got out of it. She got to just have the trip.
No, thank you.
No, thank you. She just was like, I don't think I'm ready. From what they shared, it's pretty intense. And so we were like, man, you really played the system. Like, she wasn't trying to manipulate it. She really didn't think she was ready. But we were like, we would have liked just the trip and not this really weird conversation.
Yeah,
funny.
That's hilarious. She was
Ex-
smart.
Yeah, I learned.
Yeah, like super, super smart. And so,
Yeah.
You know, I'm just wait till we have all the fun, and then I'll
yes. I'm like, and wait, not even say before the trip. Yeah, she handled that like a true champ. But eventually she did find out. Eventually we all know about it. But that's kind of the era back then, which is like, we're going to have the talk. Mm-hmm. And it's like a 0 to 100. And then it's all this stuff afterwards. And so that's why I loved taking your course, is you're sharing that it's now maybe a better way to do it, especially with all that's out there that wasn't there before, is the drip, drip, drip method. So I want to kind of have you guys explain what's maybe a better way than just dropping, you know, the whole gamut with a child.
well, I'm so glad you and your siblings have that bond.
I know.
You know, you will always remember. And just
this
know
trauma bond.
Yes, the trauma bond. And you probably, you know, have a little bit of a reaction to Legos or to wherever you went. It's like, that's what you really remember was the conversation.
Yeah.
But just know they were trying their best. Like, at least they tried. There were a lot of parents that just said, can't go there, can't do it. And it wasn't very effective, and it was traumatizing, but it was something. So,
yes. Yeah, they tried their best. I mean, on paper, I get how that could work.
Right. But you just said something, and it sort of made me think. You said, now we really have to do it this way. But honestly, as I think of this method that we have, which is completely the reverse of the talk. Mm-hmm. It's having conversations as they're asking them. If you close your eyes and think about your children, when are they asking these questions? When you're either expecting your second child, their teacher is having a baby, like they notice all of the changes that are going on. They're asking these questions, and they have this natural curiosity when they're young. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so I think this has always been the best way to teach your children about a lot of things. We do it with almost everything else. Manners, we don't say, well, you know, you're not going to really know how to use these manners till you're 14, so we'll wait. No, you start with little bitty things all along the way. Or even if you're sharing the gospel, you don't say, well, I'm going to wait till they can understand justification by faith alone. You know, or something, you know, like something big. No, let's just start with Jesus loves you, and we'll just start there. So everything that grows and becomes more beautiful or more intense or more well understood as they mature, you don't start when the maturity kicks in. You start where they are. Mm-hmm. And that's really the biblical protocol in Deuteronomy. Teach them along the way, talk to them along the road as you sit down, as you're living life. Mm-hmm. So anyway, that's the model for what we're trying to do, and it's actually so much easier for parents to start then. It's easier to talk to a 5-year-old than a 15-year-old. So
it is, and it is like what you were saying of the simplified version, because we start talking about seeds and eggs. And that happens a lot, like when we're going to a farm and like, oh, some of these eggs we eat for breakfast. Some of them turn into chickens, or cutting up a bell pepper. Like, look at all the seeds inside here. Or my daughter loves to go on walks where she just picks flowers. And we talk a lot about that because she'll see like, different plantings or different varieties. But it really does feel like it can be also more everyday than forcing this dialogue that isn't a conversation we would naturally be having either.
Exactly.
I thought it was interesting too in the course how the first thing you actually started about was using your family messaging regarding sex, where it's like, hey, take an offensive position as well. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think so often as parents, when this topic comes up, our instinct is kind of a defensive plan. I think we want to be really careful and protect them. So this is what they're not going to know, or these are the classes they're not going to attend at school, or the books they're not going to read, or the shows they're not going to watch, or the songs they're not going to listen to. We kind of have our defensive strategy, but we really encourage parents to kind of take a step back before you start having these conversations and really just kind of ask yourself, and if you're married, these are really some pre-homework questions you should be doing with your spouse to really figure out, okay, what do I really believe about sex? And then what do I want my kids to know about sex if they're growing up in my home? And I think answering that question really kind of gives some shape and direction to so many of these conversations, because if you only have this defensive strategy, then you're just kind of reactive all the time. You kind of are just flippantly reacting to the questions that come at you, and you're not prepared. And so we really encourage parents to kind of step back before they start having these conversations to figure out, okay, where are we going? Like, what do I believe? What kind of direction are we heading in for this topic of sex? And then that really kind of narrows in your conversations with your kids, and it kind of gives you a little bit more confidence because you have a plan. You kind of have a game plan. So your family message essentially answers that question we just said, which is, what do I want them to know about sex if they're growing up in my home? And we are very aware that that's going to sound different for everybody. Lots of families are going to handle this in different directions, because lots of families, it's a very personal topic. Not everybody believes the same thing when it comes to sex. And so we would just encourage families to really think through that question of, what do you want them to know? What's kind of your offensive approach?
I like the intentionality of that, of kind of leading forward too, of like, well, what is our actual position on it? And then also you were saying using the anatomically correct terms when you're describing it. Obviously there's like vagina, penis, but vulva, uterus. And you were talking even about one of the ways and strategies you can do is describing the birth story. And I remember I wrote this down. You were saying like dazzle them with the details in specific. Like the reason for that is because you're going to position yourself to be the expert in their eyes of like a baby really starts out really small in a uterus. And then after 9 months, and then a muscle starts to contract, and then she goes to the hospital, and then it's birth canal. Like all of the details. I remember hearing this being like, you're using a lot of words for this 3 and 4 year old. Like, we're going to talk about a cesarean section or, but you were basically saying like, you want to wow them of like, mom and dad know a lot about this. Like mom and dad, they probably know everything about this if I have a question. So I thought that was a unique twist as well of like, in what age should we start dazzling them with the birth story to put in their heads that like, hey, we know a ton about this if they have questions? What age are you thinking for that?
Well, it's pretty young. I think it could be very young. It's okay if they don't understand some of the words that you're using. They're not words that if they used them somewhere, people would be offended. It's an okay, but it's a very good vocabulary. Putting the baby out of the digestive system of the tummy and moving the baby to the reproductive system is one of the biggest steps that we take.
You can do it.
I mean, fine. It's such a general word. There's nothing. It's easy. I know why we use it, but and you can certainly use it. But they need to know that's not really, the baby is not growing where your food goes. It's a different place, and only women have that special part. So it's giving them great information. I know. I told my 4-year-olds when they wanted to know when the next baby was coming, how does that baby get out of there? Developmentally, usually they'll ask that question before they want to know how the baby got in. Because so we follow their developmental curiosity rather than the order of how things are. If we were doing it the order, we'd do conception and then birth, but we put birth first because usually that's their first question. So because of that, just be ready because a 3-year-old might ask for all you know, but It's mainly when it's happening around them. They see a problem, they want to know how it's getting fixed. How will that baby get out? So,
And that's young, but I think for some parents it's good to hear that like these conversations with our kids start when they're young, but they're not necessarily sensual conversations. We're talking a lot in these early years, and we really at Birds and Bees we really kind of focus on 10 and under. So we're dealing with some pretty young kids, but even introducing words to their body parts can happen at potty training. So we're talking about two-year-olds, or the story of birth, like Mary Flo just said, that was her 4-year-old is asking those questions. So I think to kind of give parents the freedom that these conversations, we're not talking about intercourse with our 4-year-old, but
Right.
we're slowly building these conversations. And we think, when they're very young, that's when they're asking us questions, and that's when they're believing us. And to your point, what you said, which I think is one of our big, I guess something we're passionate about, is that we want to really equip parents to become the loving authority on this topic. And so kids do walk away and think, wow, my mom knows a lot about babies and where they come from. So we want them to view us as kind of the experts in this. And that starts by talking when they're young and kind of building on that.
and the older they get, the more options they have to find out answers to their questions. Now especially, like they know they can Google something. Once they start school, they know they can do that. They know they can find answers down the street or with a neighbor or someone else. So we, in those early years when they're kind of close, that's just a great place to start. And once again, it's like not the end. This is just the beginning.
I like when you guys were talking about when and what age as well to tell them, because your response was like, our families are the age of our oldest child and everybody else has to keep up. So it's also, I think you were changing it from a better question than when to tell them is instead like, do I, as the mom or dad, want to be the first to tell them? Like, do I want to be the first time they hear about sex to be from me? And it is wild. I have so many friends. I was talking with someone the other day, and they have some boys and their son's older. He's like, my son's asking, I realized I never had the sex talk with him. And I was thinking, oh my gosh, like there's a chance he's not going to hear about it from you. Like if you haven't, and he's asking questions. And so I think once they are past those years where it is appropriate, to actually start talking about it, of like how'd the baby get in there, or what is sex? Like I like that you're responsive, letting them know it's a safe place for them and that the answer. Like, great question. I'm so glad you asked. You've come to the right place. And then you respond to that as well. So what would a different response be where you feel like maybe your oldest is 5 or 6 and they're asking and they're not ready? And then what would your response be to a 9 or 10-year-old and they are ready? If they asked how did baby get in there, what would you say to the 5-year-old and what would you say to the 10-year-old?
So I think it's important to remember that whether it's a 5-year-old or the 10-year-old, no matter your response, that's not going to be your only response. So if that's a 5-year-old, you might say, the seed from dad and the egg from mom make the baby. And that's it, because that we're going to be talking about this a lot more. And then even with a 10-year-old, if you realize you haven't had any of those conversations before, that answer is still a good answer for that 10-year-old, that a seed from the dad and an egg from a mom. Now, I think you build on that. And so whether that's to the 5-year-old or the 10-year-old, what I don't want people to hear is, okay, this is how you answer the 5-year-old. Seed and an egg, part of mom, part of dad. And then you build on that. But if you have the 10-year-old, just say sex and move on and never speak of it again. It's like, no, you're not, don't dismiss that. Even if it's a 10-year-old and you're thinking, wow, I've never said anything. Well, don't dive in, don't go, I think we have this instinct to get to the talk again. I'm so behind, so now I have to talk about everything at once. Like, no. With both places, if you haven't had these conversations, go start with the basics. That there's a seed and there's an egg. And when they come together, that's how we start the baby. And again, that's a conversation you might have more than once. And then as they get a little bit older, introduce body parts. As they get a little bit older, introduce the word sex. And so I think it's just a gradual, as we kind of say, the drip, drip, drip method of not to get locked into this one and done approach. And so we are very hesitant to let parents label ages and stuff, because what we don't want is for a parent listening to have a 10-year-old and kind of be like, oh man, I haven't done any of that. So sit down. I'm gonna tell you everything.
Sit down at this table and we're going to scar you.
Even worse than the scarring is just the aftermath of I did it and now we're done. And then that's we really don't want. So, I mean, there's the scarring issue, which is not ideal. But then it's I told him, check, I'm done. We don't have to talk about that again. And so even if you've said the word sex and introduced what that actually is, that's not the only time we want you to talk about it. And so we want this to be an ongoing topic, just like Mary Flo said, with faith or with manners or, household habits, whatever it is we're teaching our kids. We're constantly, maybe not constantly, but we're talking about this often and pointing out examples in our day-to-day lives or in the culture or down the street. And we're putting our voice on this topic. And we think sex and teaching our children about that is something we want parents to use their voice on, not just once at 5 and not just once at 10, but often, early and often.
Sometimes that firstborn is hesitant to ask parents. Like for some reason, they just have this innate fear of embarrassing their parents or putting their parents in an awkward situation, and they just sense the tension over this topic, so they don't ask. And that doesn't mean they're not curious. So we encourage parents in that situation to move forward to your children. Don't wait for them to ask. Don't put them in charge of the timing of this topic. So a good question that we'll give you for your children is just to say, sweetheart, have you ever wondered exactly how that baby got in there? Just invite them into the conversation because they may wonder about it. They may be curious, but they don't really know how to verbalize it. Very young children that are asking, they have no idea that they are asking about sex. Like what they're asking is, how did that baby get in there? But the way that baby got in there is sex. And so they're not really asking about sex. They just want to know the mechanics of how did that baby get in there. So we know the answer is sex, but let's lead them up to that conversation gradually. Well, a part comes from mommy and a part comes from daddy. And so you're not keeping information from them. You're just in charge. And you being in charge means you get to talk about it often and appropriately and age appropriately. But we're just all so ingrained with the idea of the talk. We cannot get away from it even when we're trying. We just think, let me check. How do I get to check this off my list?
Get it over with.
Yeah. I like that you added even that part of like they're not correlating it as sex. I remember one thing that you had said in the course is like eventually you do have to label what you told them of like, sweetheart, what I told you about was called sexual intercourse, more commonly known as sex. Otherwise, like there's not that, they're not going to draw the correlation that anything that we're talking about has anything to do with the word sex. But then you also add that we then need to kind of preempt it of like you're going to hear a lot of confusing things about the word sex. So if you hear something, people are talking about it, or you read something about the word sex, like come to me or dad, because we'll always tell you the truth. And then you also mentioned setting boundaries around the conversation of like, hey, what we talked about is a parent to child conversation. It's not your job to tell all your friends. Every parent really wants to talk about this with their kids. Like if you ever have any questions, we're happy to answer them, but it's not your job to go back to school and tell everybody, which is a funny caveat, but you kind of need to add that for kids.
For sure, because some kids, it's so personality, and your kid's personality better than we do. But some kids like to have information and be the keeper of news, like the Santa Claus information. Sometimes we compare it to that. Of some kids are going to take that information and take it to the grave, and some kids like, well, who can I tell next? So mindful of other families' boundaries, because of course we would love for everybody to adopt this approach and move forward with it, but not everyone's going to. So you want to be mindful of other families who may not think that now is the right time for them to know that word. But again, I think it's just helpful for kids to understand the information that you want them to have, because ultimately it's a protective layer, because it shapes their understanding of what sex is. And now I have 2 kids who are 12 and 10, and now they have a solid foundation. We've had so many conversations about different topics or different slang terms or trends or whatever, and we can go back and say, oh, it's talking about sex. So can you see why that's appropriate and why it's disrespectful and kind of crass, and we're not going to talk like that. And that has allowed for easier conversations where if they had no idea what sex was, how would I work backwards in that? So in a way, I just encourage parents to, everything's easier when they're younger. I mean, I take that back. There are a lot of things that are really hard when kids are younger.
But this is not one of them.
This is not one of them.
This is not one of them.
Sorry, there's actually a lot when their kids are younger. However, talking to your kids about these hard or these difficult conversations when they're younger is actually easier. When they're really young, it's hard on us because we feel uncomfortable, but they're kind of like, okay, sure. I mean, okay, whatever. That doesn't that's not that confusing for them to understand. We're the ones who have our own hangups.
Yeah.
But once kids get older and they kind of know, well, the kids were laughing about that, or that's kind of funny for some reason, or
Mm-hmm.
I'm already in on that joke but me, and you're dealing with probably some things that are outside of the information you want your kids to have, then you're going to really think hindsight, oh man, I wish we would have started when they were younger.
Before the hormones kick
Yeah.
in, because then they're on this side of puberty and we're on that side. So we're getting all nervous because we know, the dangers that might be out there for them, or the pleasures that might be awaiting them, or how powerful it all is. Like we're on this side of that barrier, but they're just curious. They just kind of want to know. They just need some information. And so we kind of have to take it at face value with them.
Well, I think you're right. We really are on the other side of knowing how powerful and pleasurable it is. And you also talk about kind of the beauty and the boundaries that we want them to understand. Like the world screaming messaging to our kids about sex. Like, what's our voice? And you use the example of like, okay, talking about a tiger at a zoo. Like, it's so beautiful, but the reason we can enjoy the tiger is because he's where he should be, like behind the glass. Like if that were to get out of a cage, we'd be in trouble. Similar with fire or the ocean, like water's so beautiful, but if it's a tsunami, it's dangerous, talking about when things are in their place, they're beautiful, but when they get out of their place, it can be dangerous. How do we word this in a way that clarifies it without adding this particular shame that sometimes comes with this conversation of talking about just their choice for sex eventually, because eventually it is going to be their choice.
And I think that's something when we're dealing with young kids is we're presenting things in a kid-friendly, age-appropriate way. Like those examples of boundaries that you shared that we talk about a lot in our courses. We're setting up this foundation for ideas, right? This concept of something can be good in the right place. Or boundaries are actually meant to protect us, not to hold us back. And so by laying these ideas out for our kids, I think it's really helpful. And then eventually these conversations that you have with a 18, 19, 20-year-old or whatever is going to be very different than the conversation you're having with a 5-year-old. So ultimately, a young adult like that or a teenager will make their own choices, but you have had almost decades of conversations of explaining this is good and yet these are the boundaries. Why? Because this can be hurtful. This could be destructive in a physical way or an emotional way. So again, these conversations are much more mature as our kids get older. And so I think back to what Birds and Bees does, which is talk to parents of younger kids, is we're setting up a kind of a pattern of communication, of trust and open communication. And essentially with that, I think you're taking away a lot of the shame on this topic by letting them know, hey, this is something that's important to us and this is why we're going to talk about it. This is the way we believe it's intended to be. And so again, I think it depends too on your faith. If you're wanting to come at it through a Christian point of view, we kind of expand that mindset of beauty, boundaries, and brokenness. We live in a broken world and not everything is going to be perfect all the time, but Christ redeems all things for his glory. And so how can we live in that truth? Well, nothing is unforgivable. Nothing is outside of his knowledge or his plan. And so I think that's obviously a much bigger, heavier conversation that you won't have that with a 4-year-old, but with a 17-year-old, that might be a bigger conversation. So I think going to your question about shame, I would say so much of it is just starting young and establishing your voice on this topic. So when you are having a conversation with a teenager who's making decisions or a young adult, then that's kind of a trusted voice in their life. And it has been for a very long time. And you speak with a tone of voice that isn't shameful or uncomfortable. And that's been something that's been tested year after year after year.
Okay, babe, what's your favorite fight that we've ever had?
Favorite?
Your favorite fight?
Okay, the first one that comes to mind is when we had Disneyland annual passes, and it would take like an hour or an hour and a half to get there every time. And we are just car fighters. We just now know we can't fight in a car. But you got so upset that we had to pull over. And then my thought was like, wait, are we going to Disneyland or not?
We fought a lot of times on the way to the happiest place on earth. That could be the descriptor of our entire marriage. But we've created a course called How to Fight Better.
with our actual marriage counselor, Dr. Jonathan Cood, who's helped us through many fights throughout the journey of our relationship. But he's given us helpful and practical tools of how to fight better. And we really wanted to share them with you guys. We didn't have a healthy model of conflict growing up. We had to learn these. And so we really wanted to be able to break it down. And it's so much bigger than a podcast episode. These are important things where the modules are small chunks. You watch them with your partner, and then you have an entire discussion together. We're really, really proud of it. It's something that's helped our relationship thrive. So if you go to joinpillowtalk.com, you can get How to Fight Better. It's out now. Okay, back to the episode.
I like the way she used the word voice, because what we have to do is consider how much shame comes through our voice, how much anxiety comes through our voice. And so practicing talking to your children when they're young helps you to know how to control that a little bit better when they're teenagers, when things do get a little bit anxious. I would say when they're young, try to channel the pediatrician voice. I'm talking about your body. I'm not, it's nothing to be afraid of. Everything's like calm and under control. And then when they're older, that may sound maybe a little babyish to them. And so I would say put on your business person. Like, let's, you now have a really steady girlfriend. I know for a lot of kids your age, sex is an option. It's actually an option for anyone who is alone with the person they care about a lot. But I think we've told you since you were young that this is really for adults who are married. And it is, at minimum, it's an adult decision. So let's talk about decisions. Like, how do adults make decisions? So instead of going to the you better not, which is what you wanted, or you better wait, or you better, like all of the things that you may feel internally, if you can direct them into a neutral zone, like how do you make a business decision, or how do you make an adult decision, and take the charged things that you're feeling, set them aside for a while so that they can hear what you're trying to say.
I like that, because ultimately, even for me, of like my choice of, I made the intentional choice to wait until I got married, which is very difficult when you're in love with someone. Like, that's the hardest thing. If you're going to say no to someone you're in love with, like, that's really difficult. But it was because it was my own personal conviction I had. It wasn't my parents' conviction. It was my own choice at the end of the day. Had to come from me. If it came from like wanting to please someone else or wanting to do what they thought was right, I don't know if it would have stood as strong. But I also would add, I think even this concept of like porn, like that's accessible by kids like 8 or 11. My children don't obviously have access to tech or anything like that. But I do want to lay the foundation of seeing bad pictures. That's what you talk about, of basically like, hey, if you see a bad picture, you could get a pit in your stomach. Like, if you see a bad picture, here's the plan. You stop, you run, you tell, or like you say something. But one of my favorite pieces you add on there is like, if you see a bad picture, you're not a bad person. Because, obviously they're going to have this reaction to it. And so we got the book, Good Picture, Bad Pictures Junior. And so I've been reading that with my kids. And it's so interesting because we live in Los Angeles. So like billboards, I had no idea how many inappropriate or scary billboards there are. And I'll hear my daughter in the back seat put her hand up, turn to the side and go, that's a bad picture, and just like yell it, which is very like, my daughter, good for her. And then my 4-year-old son goes, where? And starts looking for it. So yeah.
Which side?
Yeah, which side? Where are we not supposed to look? And then I think that's interesting too, is like just their differences of personalities navigating it. Like my daughter is very like, we're not going to look at this. This isn't appropriate. This is not good for my heart. But you say like people go up and it's like, hey, like my son has his hand in his pants, or he's like, grabbing his crotch. What do I do? And then we go up with girls and we're like, oh my gosh, like my daughter, like she's touching herself. And it's all of a sudden this completely different conversation. Can you also talk a little bit more about how at this age, it isn't as much sexual as it is sensual? Kids are sensory seeking and they're also figuring that out. Can you help? Because when you described that, it really helped put it into place for me.
So first of all, I think this is our most frequently asked question. I feel like I talk about this all the time because parents are always asking about their children touching themselves or rubbing against something or whatever. So the buzzword, which we try not to use a lot just because we are on Instagram, which is a funny place to say certain words. But parents see this behavior and think masturbation. How do I talk to my kids about that? When we really prefer the word body exploration, because we had this long podcast episode we did with a pediatrician a while ago that we always reference parents to, because she helped us frame it in such an age appropriate way where kids that are discovering that, oh, that felt good, is the same exploration as scratching of the arm, or something like that. It's like, oh, that felt good, I would do that again. And so they have no connection to this feeling feels good and like having sex. They are not connecting that dot whatsoever. And so often, like Mary Flo explained earlier, kids are over here on this prepubescent world and we're on this side post-pubescent with probably a lot of baggage around this topic or, experiences that we're bringing to the table. And so we see our young child behaving in this way and we are bringing our own things onto this topic and making it such a bigger deal. I had this conversation or DM the other day point is we need to separate our own issues and our own vantage point to say, I know that feels good, but can we speak? The question is always, can we speak into this without creating shame? And yes, tone of voice is key, redirect, distract, set boundaries around that with habits, hygiene, and manners, all these things. But I think it's important for parents to hear the distinction that your conversation around this topic with a 4-year-old who's rubbing against the couch or whatever is going to be a very different conversation than with your 16-year-old. And these are very different conversations. But I think sometimes parents, well-intentioned parents, like this is a good example. This woman sent this message the other day. My daughter was, discovered that felt good. She was, had her hands on our pants. And so we had launched into this big conversation about how that special feeling is designed for marriage. And that is a sin. And we need to pray about this and all these things. And it's kind of like, I understand where her heart was in that, but that is very heavy and that is very complex and that has no comprehension for that 4-year-old or 6-year-old. It's like, don't do that. Don't do that because I know what you're trying to do and you're kind of thinking, well, we believe that's for, it's like, sure. But they aren't thinking about sex. They're not thinking that whatsoever. So can we speak into that? Can we redirect? Can we say, oh, let's keep our hands clean? Or, our vagina is really delicate. Or, oh, that's where we go to the bathroom. Let's go wash our hands after you touch your penis. Or, oh, it's not a good habit to get into, all these things. Speak into it. Set clear boundaries. But adding the sensual side of it as a parent, I think is very confusing for a young child. And so I'd say you can speak into it without creating shame. But just to always remember on all these conversations, we're coming towards this topic, body exploration, or even the definition of sex, we're coming at it with the dangers and pleasures mixed into it. Where a young child isn't. They are taking everything as cause and effect. Oh, that felt good. Or, just kind of the bare facts. And so I think it's really important for all these conversations we've talked about today to remember that who's hearing this information, because that child is very young and isn't connecting the dots for these things. If that makes sense.
It totally does. And I remember that aspect of you even were making it akin to like if they were picking their nose. Like it's a tone of voice, quickly, matter of fact. Like it is the manners part of like, hey, it's not polite to touch yourself with others are around. Like that part also feels like, oh, I always envision like if they were picking their nose, how would I say it? And I wouldn't feel like I don't want them to feel shame about picking their nose. Like, no, kind of, don't do that around people. It's a little gross.
Let me get you a tissue. You know we don't do that. Mm-hmm. Let's go.
Yeah, the hygiene part, like, hey, your pants are not the best place for your hands to be. There are germs, And then I like that part where you add there, like, as you get older, you're going to see there's a room full of people and no one have their hands in their pants. So it means at some point, like, they learned that's just not what we do. And so trying to help it also before, like, I think you said just now, the manners, hygiene, and habit. I feel like that's also the part of, essentially just helping them adjust this ability before it turns into a habit. But it's quick, it's tone of voice, it's matter of fact.
And this pediatrician mentioned, like, this is a thing that young kids do and typically grow out of it. So this is not necessarily if you're doing this behavior at 4, well, buckle up. It's going to be a long road. I mean, obviously there are certain situations. But she was just saying overall, this is typically a season.
Yes. And once they are around other people and there is sort of a group dynamic, once they go off to school. Like, not that it doesn't happen at school, but it starts to be understood. Other people aren't doing this. This is not polite, or this is not.
The social awareness
Yes,
kicks in.
exactly. That's what I was looking for.
Another aspect about boundaries of like being when do you decide when to stop changing in front of your kids? Or like for me, like we have an older daughter, younger son, so my husband and I were discussing, and I love that you were saying it's basically just to be respectful of the most modest person in your home. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yes, that's basically the guideline. Is let's just know what it means to be respectful of modest people, and notice that may be the parent, that may be the child. We don't know who that will be. But if your child walks in and they're just totally still being themselves, and they don't seem to be staring at your privates or acting ashamed, or if life just continues normally and you're okay with that, then I don't think there's a problem going on. But if they walk in and you notice they're really not looking at your eyes, they're looking at your breasts, and they can't even remember why they came in the room because they're so distracted by that, then you can say, you know what, if you'll just knock, I'll put my robe on. Just knock before you come in. Or you know what, I am so ready for some privacy. I'm taking a bath right now. If y'all will just talk to me through the door. But see, they have to be old enough to do that. So when they're young, they're going to be coming in and out. And that's just normal life. And so that's nothing to get all buttoned up about. But once they reach a certain age, either you become uncomfortable or they become uncomfortable, and you just have to reset the deck. So
Yeah, that's hard to do when they're 2. But when they're older, absolutely. Like that helps a lot to also kind of adjust. Like when they're younger, they're not thinking about anything. But when there is that type of switch, or when maybe you're as the parent the most modest in the room, and you're like, now I'm at a place where I'd like to talk between the door or put a robe on too.
yes,
Right.
exactly.
And that will ebb and flow. Modesty is such a swing. There's even culturally, it's so different, but it's going to change from family to family. Some families are going to have a very immodest home, and that's okay for them. And some families will be very buttoned up, and that's okay too. But really just to be aware if somebody expresses a desire for privacy verbally or non-verbally, and just kind of be mindful of that. But I would say loosely, we don't really see kids express that until like late elementary school, like closer to 10 almost, is when they're kind of like, I don't want to take a bath with my brothers anymore, or that kind of thing. So I think for your family specifically, like 4 and 6, if they're still fine with it, I would say not a problem. And it makes it easier on you, Mom.
Yeah, I don't mind. I'm definitely not going to be the least modest in the family, so I'm going to have to wait for someone else to set the tone on that. But my question, so my kids are going older. I feel like the next kind of wave would be near the onset of puberty. And so you guys talked about like before that happens, talk about some upcoming changes like in their bodies, their world, social life, responsibilities, privileges, like all those things are changing. How would you kind of also lay the groundwork for that conversation for a parent whose kid may be entering puberty soon?
Well, once again, we're just trying to bring those up, not just save it for an age and then, okay, here are all the things that are changing, but kind of normalize periods even when they're young, both for girls and boys, so that when they want to know what this is in your purse, you can explain it to them in a very simple way, and then that starts to normalize periods. Megan has had some great posts lately about when their body is changing and they starting to have body odor, where she just puts the deodorant in the drawer and says, I've got some deodorants here that you might want to try after your shower. Boom, that's it. That's all they needed to know. Oh gosh, great. I'll see which one I like. Same with bras, same with, but all along the way, this is just such a great opportunity to start pointing things out or see things that are in their world. And because you've approached it already in an open-handed way, you can do that. And that is what I think, one of the things we really want to grow in children is empathy. And so letting them see, I see that person being very uncomfortable over there with that situation. What would we do to make them feel more comfortable? Or this, I felt like someone was kind of making fun of that little girl. Did you feel that too? How did that make you feel? What could we do? Or, oh, somebody showed this picture at school. How do you think that made that girl feel? So we also just want to enter into not reinforcing the world of, well, who cares about that? But instead to grow empathy in our children. And to do that, they have to understand what it's like to be a boy who's going through puberty and what it's like for a girl.
Mm-hmm.
That's
And
so helpful.
Talking about puberty, you know, you kind of have like the talk, you know, when you're talking about this is sex, but then also, and for some reason, we decided forever ago that the talk also included every single thing that's going to change about your body. And, you know, first of all, it's kind of like, well, why do you have to understand sex and a period all at the same time? Like, that's a lot, you know.
Yeah.
You're not going to become impregnated the day you start your period. So I think it's fine to separate those two, as you should. And just like we've broken down the sex talk into these drip, drip, drip conversations, we feel the same about puberty. And so instead of saying, okay, well, now that you're 10, in the next year or 2 or 3, you're probably going to go through puberty. So here's all the things that are happening to you. You know, instead of having a big talk about puberty, to drip, drip, drip puberty. You know, if they're, you know, daddy, your arms are so hairy. It's like, yeah, well, when you grow up to be a man, you'll become more hairy too. Or you'll get hair in lots of places. Or, you know, yeah, your body will change too. Your chest will become a breast. That's what happens to women as they go through puberty. I mean, lots of these little conversations. So it's not this big shock of like, what? I'm going to do what? You know, or like with little kids, if they're going through your purse, what's that? Nothing. Don't look through my purse. Like, oh, that's a tampon that women use for their periods. Or, you know, or a period is just the body's way of cleaning out the uterus. I mean, you're breaking down these topics, and so when they get to this age where it's like, yeah, you probably will have your period in the next, you know, 2 years, but your doctor can kind of give us more of a heads up or whatever. These are no longer taboo topics, and that's, I think, the ultimate goal. You know, the goal is not so much that they have this full scientific understanding of like the uterine walls and how they shed, and I mean, that's all great if that's interesting to you, but that's not the goal. The goal is for them to realize, oh, this is what it is and this is how it happens. And that would be a level of understanding that we would want your boys and your girls to have, not just your girls, to kind of tag on to the empathy piece too of everyone's going to feel kind of funny during puberty. You know, the girls are going through all this stuff. The boys are going through all this stuff. These are their voices are going to change. That's going to be weird. And they're probably feeling, you know, insecure about that too. So empathy is a good piece while you're also teaching, kind of, you know, puberty at large. Like, this is kind of the general thing that's happening over here. This is what's happening over here. And look around. Every single woman, every single man in this world has gone through it. Everybody grows up. Puberty is just another word for growing up, you know, to kind of help destigmatize. And that's kind of one of the goals we have at Birds and Bees for all these topics, is to just destigmatize and kind of take away the taboo of these topics, because it's going to happen. And we say, you know, normalize periods because periods are normal, or normalize puberty. Puberty is normal, you know? And so often there's this like secret, I don't know, hush tones around it, when really it's like, well,
and a lot of fear from parents gets put into that. When Megan was talking about shaving legs, there was so many backstories of girls.
A lot of baggage.
How traumatized they were by that. And we would like it not to be such trauma for the parents or for the kids. So you may need to stop. Yeah, you may need to stop and think, now, why did I have trauma about that? What was not done well? And let me not do it that way. Let me pick an easier, happier way.
And a lot of that, after these stories, after stories are being shared to us, it's been really insightful. It's like, I think a lot of that was put on by a resistant parent, unintentionally maybe. And so we're just really trying to encourage parents to be proactive. Be proactive in these conversations. Bring up these topics. You know, put the sports bras in the drawer before they need it. Don't put this responsibility of a new topic on a very awkward child. And essentially that's what we've done with these puberty years. Everyone knows that you're just drowning in insecurities and you know, ness at like 12 and 13. And so instead we're saying, well, I'm not going to bring it up unless she wants to. It's like, well, she can barely get her words out about anything, let alone, Mom, can I shave? Or I think I need to wear a bra, or all the girls are wearing one but me, or whatever it is. So just to really, we want to encourage parents to take the lead on these topics, be that proactive parent, and essentially just kind of lead them, you know, be that loving authority on all these topics.
Yeah, I'm definitely hearing that as the common theme, which is like, it's not these big weighty moments of puberty and sex or combined, like it's the drip, drip, drip. It's natural, age-appropriate conversations as it comes, and it's proactive, as you said. I saw the reel where you like just put the deodorant in the bathroom drawer. You're like, hey, it's here. You know, I love that because it feels like a natural way to initiate the dialogue, you know, and not, I don't think any boy's going to come home and be like, I think I smell, you know, it's this.
They won't.
No, this helpful parenting kind of lighted, but thank you guys so much for coming on here. Like your resources have helped me so much. I'd love for you. Can you share where people can kind of follow you, not only online, but like the online course if they want to take it themselves?
Yes. Thank you, Haven. You have been such a great advocate for birds and bees. If you want more of this, you can follow us on Instagram at birds__bees. We share lots of talking tips. And then ultimately, our most comprehensive resource is the course that you were talking about. And we'd love to share a code for you to share with your listeners to save 20%. So we'll follow up with you on that, and you can maybe put it in the show notes. But that's at birds-bees.com.
Perfect. And I'm also going to recommend do it as a group. So I did it with my book club of about like 8 friends. We all took the course. And one, it was helpful to have this dialogue back and forth and, share our experiences with what it was like growing up, how we want to change it for the future, but also to kind of be in line, like kind of lockstep arms with parents and say like, hey, we're going to try and do it differently. And here's a different way. And maybe we all have a different family message that's offensive of the taking charge and not being on the defense. But it's also helpful to know, okay, I'm with some other parents who are, working through this together, and we're sharing tips and hiding from the Los Angeles billboards of bad pictures together.
Picking new routes on the way to school.
Well, we do think, these hard things don't have to be done alone. So I think when you do have a close group of friends that you can do it together, you don't have to share every episode with every, child, but with every friend. But I do think it just gives you a little courage,
Yeah, I agree. Well, thank you guys for coming on here.
Of course, we're very grateful for all you've done to help birds and bees. So thank you for having us.
Thank you, Haven.
My pleasure.